Okay, good morning. If everybody can gather a seat or a stand or a place to sit, we'll get started here. Meeting of the Energy, Utilities, and Telecom Committee is in order. Morning, everyone. Welcome to committee. First off is, yes, sir, Marcus? What's that? Yeah. Can you not hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. It's like a rock star. I got to have that. Okay. Got too many cords here. This is supposed to be wireless. Anyway, can you hear me now? Nobody? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, is there anybody that have bill introductions? Bill, I have one. I'd like to introduce 21 RS 0827. It's on legal publications and what am I trying to say here? Making it virtual. Do I have a motion to accept that? So Representative Neighbors, I'm sorry. Is there a second? Do I have a second? Representative Berkowitz, thank you. Any other bill introductions? Okay, we'll move along real quick here. A presentation from Ed Cross, the Independent Oil and Gas Producers Association. Ed, welcome to committee. And it's probably a good thing you're here so we can actually hear you. Appreciate you taking it. And if you'd introduce yourself to the new members of the committee.
There it is. Good morning, Chairman, Vice Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Ed Cross. I'm the president of the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association. And I want to thank you today for the opportunity to share my thoughts about the state of the oil and gas industry and the impacts on the small businesses that make up the oil and gas industry here in Kansas. It's my honor and privilege to serve this great industry that enhances life experiences and improves the quality of life for people around the world. You know, I'm lucky to be able to work on the things that I like to work on, but I'm even more lucky to get to work with the men and women that make up this great industry. The Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, our members account for 92% of the oil and natural gas produced in Kansas. And with nearly 3,500 members across Kansas, we're the lead state national advocate for the industry. You'll see in your packets, I left you a packet of information, a number of documents, including the Kansas Oil and Gas Strategic Analysis, a paper called The State of the Oil and Gas Industry, information on hydraulic fracturing, induced seismicity, climate issues, and more. I'm not going to go over all of those. Those are reference material. We'll be talking about a few of those things here. And you also have copies of some slides that would go along with this presentation as well. Now, over my 30-year oil and gas career, I've seen many changes in the oil and gas industry, but in no time have I experienced the dramatic and rapid change of what's happened over the last 10+ months and continuing today, where we've seen a rapid transition from economic growth to decline. And I don't know a lot of things about the future, but I do know that the pace and the complexity of that change is likely to increase. You know, since mid-March of last year, 2020, we have all had our world turned upside down by a virus. And the oil and gas industry was not only negatively impacted by global energy demand destruction brought on by that COVID pandemic, but we've also been hit with a concurrent global crude oil supply shock. Crude oil markets in 2020 were perplexing. The pandemic destroyed about 30% of global crude oil demand, and then that demand was already beginning to fall in January, February of 2020, and then OPEC agreed for production cuts starting in March of 2020. However, in February, Russia refused to hyphenate itself with the OPEC production cuts and sought to exploit the situation to harm U.S. producers. They were looking to try to gain market share. And so they were unwilling to cede that market share to the United States or anyone else. Saudi Arabia responded by raising their production nearly 27% in April of 2020. So we had global demand destruction occurring because of COVID, and then we have Russia and Saudi Arabia flooding the market with oil all at the same time. Crude oil prices actually on the market went negative in April of 2020. Then OPEC in April also last year agreed to cut production as well as Saudi Arabia and extended those production cuts in June of 2020. So Russia said they would increase their production if prices go above $50 a barrel, and they're talking about Brent crude oil price. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute, because that's the price they think American producers need in order to increase production, and they don't want American production to increase. Russia wants to keep that market share. Saudi Arabia prefers production increases only if oil gets above $70. That's what they need on that. So in December of 2020, just a couple of months ago, Saudi Arabia unilaterally cut production by 1 million barrels per day. So Russia was not joining them. They just did that by themselves. The economy's been engaged in a slow recovery from the coronavirus, and we've seen some improvement in energy demand. Global oil supply-demand balance is cleaning up with shut-ins. U.S. production has dropped by about 2 million barrels per day. OPEC has its cuts, and we're starting to see a slow return of demand. Kansas crude oil prices topped $53 a barrel in early January of 2020, and then dipped below $11 a barrel in March before falling below $1 a barrel. It was actually 25 cents a barrel in April of 2020. Prices began to recover, surpassing $25 last May before pushing above $30 in late June and topping $35 by the end of 2020. I think today Kansas prices are about $43. I didn't look at it exactly when I came in, but that's about what we're getting today. But the signs of improvements come against the backdrop of rising COVID cases and chatter anew about implementing restrictions on economic activity. And so it raises concern about the sustainability of oil prices. And fear exists in the oil and gas industry on both sides of the ledgers, with concern about slowing demand and swelling supplies. So if I look at the impact on the Kansas oil and gas industry, the fallout from the COVID-19 and the concurrent crude oil supply shock is having a profound effect. As we said, 30% of global energy demand was destroyed by the pandemic, and exploration and production in Kansas has slowed dramatically. Operators in Kansas, responded quickly by laying down rigs and shutting in production and cutting CapEx by as much as 60%. In Kansas, operators shut in nearly 5,000 wells over the last year, resulting in oil production falling 14.5% and natural gas production falling 9.2%. In 2020, Kansas experienced over $180 million in lost oil production. And that concomitant economic impact of lost production is felt by all Kansans, as this lost output has resulted in over $360 million in lost gross state product for the state of Kansas. Oil production in Kansas during calendar year 2019 was 33.2 million barrels, or about 90,000 barrels a day. Oil production in calendar year 2020 was about 28.3 million barrels, or about 77,000 barrels per day. And that's where we get the 14.5% decline. Since 2014, Kansas oil production has dropped by 42.6%. However, we hope to see production improvement in this year, in 2021, as prices recover, if they recover adequately. But it's still going to be some time before we see the production in the 90 to 100,000 barrels per day level again. This has all had impact on tax collections. Severance tax collections in calendar year 2020 were down 43% from last year, down 84% from 2014. Ad valorem tax collections to counties in calendar year 2020 has declined by 41% over last year. And in 2020, permits in the oil and gas industry were down nearly 54% from last year, and rigs are down nearly 59%. When you look at what oil and gas companies are doing, right now they've learned a lot of lessons from crashes in the past, price crashes in the past, but they have furloughed and laid off a lot of people. 25% of the workforce in oil and gas industry is furloughed or laid off. Wages have been reduced by as much as 20% or more. They're refocusing their CapEx, and they're trying to streamline and optimize their cost structures. But many of them have dropped, since 2014, have dropped their lifting costs, or how much it costs to produce a barrel, by as much as $10 a barrel. They're high grading and drilling only the best projects, and for Kansas, for the most part, improved productivity is more about using existing technology rather than using new technologies. So they're adhering to cash flow neutrality, and they're just really trying to stay afloat. When we look at the energy outlook for 2021, we see that it's still subject to heightened levels of uncertainty because of responses to COVID-19. as they continue to evolve. Reduced economic activity related to the pandemic has caused changes in energy demand and supply patterns, and those continue in 2021. On January the 7th, as I said, Saudi Arabia moved to unilaterally cut production by 1 million barrels per day and extend that through February and March. That move had pushed Brent crude oil prices above $50. Now, when you say Brent, Kansas posting prices usually $12 to $13 less than what you hear Brent prices as being quoted. So, the Saudi Arabia's cut has renewed and restated, and their renewed and restated determination has strengthened the floor for prices. However, there is still risk to that. Russia has threatened, to increase production if prices stay above $50, and they are above $50 today. But if they stay there sustained, Russia would want to increase their production because, again, they don't want the increased prices to cause American companies to increase their production again. And Russia wants to keep that or try to steal that market share away from American production. The latest Energy Information Administration forecast, which was released in January, they project Kansas crude oil prices in 2021 to average about $38 a barrel. So, the market's in backwardation. As I said, today's price is around $43 for Kansas, and backwardation just means that future prices are less than what we're getting today. That's reflecting EIA's expectations that inventories remain high. They will decline with rising global oil demand and restrained OPEC production. As far as the association, we've been trying to work to help our members with updates and resources. Last year, we worked with the Kansas Department of Revenue to adjust the crude oil price bulletin for ad valorem taxes, which is based on what they project oil prices to be for the upcoming year. Last year, they projected $46, and in January, prices dropped to as low as 25 cents a barrel. So we were able to work with them, and they adjusted that to $23 a barrel, which was a big help, and they did a good job of looking at the facts and making a good judgment there. We worked with Governor Kelly to ensure oil field workers were classified as essential in her Kansas Essential Functions Framework. We've been providing resources and webinars and information on a number of topics. We joined calls for anti-dumping investigation at the federal level, engaged U.S. Commerce Secretary calling for an anti-dumping action petition against Russia and Saudi Arabia. We joined calls for an investigation of negative crude oil prices and trading irregularities back from April of 2020. Kansas prices was 25 cents a barrel, but many places was negative. We have also engaged our Kansas delegation and 17 other federal policymakers, both Republicans and Democrats, to give them an update on the impact to the small businesses of the oil and gas industry. When we look at key challenges and opportunities going forward, we need to find solutions in Kansas to the high electric rates. I will say that, as much as 30 to 50% of the expenses of oil and gas operations are electric rates. And in general, they hurt general economic development. Kansas has one of the lowest electric generation prices in the U.S., but by far the highest retail electric rates in the Midwest. Kansas consumers spent more than $775 million more on electricity than they did just 10 years ago. So electric costs are the highest operating costs, let's say, of the oil and gas industry of our wells. And, we support legislative studies on the competitiveness of Kansas electric rates. We should also avoid energy policies driven by zero-sum game philosophy for energy that said we must have less fossil fuel so we can have more of something else. Many state energy plans around the nation fail because they start with a preferred source and work backwards. And with all the propaganda circulated today across the nation about energy, all too often we see state proposals that establish some type of green standard that's really much more to do with raising revenue than helping the environment. The result is average households would have to pay significantly more for goods and services, and that families that spend a bigger portion of their household income on transportation, utilities, and household goods, particularly low-income families, are hurt, not helped by such schemes. And it also, if the goal is really to reduce emissions, then it's worth noting that we are already doing a good job of achieving that goal. Today, greenhouse gas emissions are near 25-year lows. According to the latest report from the Energy Information Administration, U.S. carbon emissions are lowest they have been in nearly 7 decades. In the meantime, European and Chinese emissions continue to rise. Even more interesting, and this is an important fact here, is that natural gas is responsible for 61% of overall reductions in power sector carbon emissions since 2005, which is 57% more than the reductions attributable to renewable energy sources. U.S. Department of Energy did a study, a third-party study of oil and gas emissions from marginal wells and tank facilities throughout the United States, and they did Kansas in December of 2019, and they found no quantifiable or measurable emissions of either methane or volatile organic compounds that were detected at wells or tank batteries. A rational, data-driven, common-sense approach to energy policy is what our state needs, and it needs to be based on science, free market, entrepreneurial spirit. And by focusing on efficient use of energy, it's possible to lower emissions without imposing a carbon tax or even more environmental restrictions. Thankfully, that does not require abandoning efforts to protect the environment. The key is to avoid placing unnecessary political or legal obstacles in the way of innovation and expansion. An energy policy that values innovation over regulation can turn energy policies into great opportunities for economic growth and energy security. And this approach is not just good business, it's good stewardship and a much better strategy for improving quality of life for all. Our state and nation should use our abundant energy resources to lift people up, which is different than a philosophy of embracing a zero emissions world. As far as the legislative issues, Cuyahoga, we're working with our partners at Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association. I know Tom Pallas is here, represent them, and Kansas Corporation Commission on abandoned well bills, where we're looking to combine abandoned well plugging funds and provide more regulatory certainty and reimbursement procedures. Also, I provided testimony for the special committee last summer, recommending that the KCC oil and gas fee schedules and penalty amounts not be increased in the near term as the industry recovers from this COVID pandemic. I also encouraged the committee to include a recommendation that any evaluation of future KCC oil and gas industry fee and penalty changes follow the rule of law and follow through the regulatory rulemaking process and not be promulgated through agency orders that bypass rulemaking process. We're also supporting the Kansas Energy Choice Act. That's a bill that's been heard in the Senate Utilities Committee. I think it's there. It just basically ensures choice for energy providers. That doesn't discriminate against any energy source for the homes and buildings. Some say the bill is needed to meet climate goals, but that's simply not correct. As we've said, the U.S. emitted 12% fewer energy-related carbon emissions in 2018 than 2005. Like I said, the natural gas is responsible for 2.8 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide emission reduction since 2005. That's 61% of the overall power sector reductions and 57% more than attributable to renewables. We work with our pro-energy state and national groups on legislative, regulatory, technology, and workforce challenges. Actually, even work with a group that met with Prime Minister Netanyahu from Israel a couple of years ago. And he said the American oil and gas made all the difference in the world for them. And he said the U.S. spends $3 trillion from 2001 through 2017 on Middle East security. And that's spending that could all end with continued American energy independence. And that's $3 trillion that could be spent on something else, like economic recovery or, it's hardly ever thought of, but even reducing our debt. But when we look at what powers the U.S. today and overall energy, oil makes up 37%, natural gas 32%, coal 11%, wind and solar 4%. So that's 80% is from fossil fuels. And when you look at what's going to power the world in the future, Energy Information Administration estimates that 30 years from now, fossil fuels will account for 69% of U.S. energy production. Even though world oil demand is projected to plateau around 2035, oil and gas is expected to remain the primary energy sources through 2050. Global oil consumption is projected to grow 14% from 2015 to 2035, and natural gas is projected to grow 37% over the same period. Renewable energy sources are projected to continue their growth streak, which is 10.4% of power generation last year. That report also said electric cars are projected to make up 27% of new cars by the year 2045. Oil is projected to remain the largest share of the energy mix through 2045. So in closing, let me say that the oil and gas industry shares an energy future vision with the public. We and our families live and work right here in Kansas, and we care as much as anyone about people's needs and concerns and our environment, and we take these issues and concerns very seriously. So we're focused, Cuyahoga is focused on helping the industry for value reconstruction, and we look at recovery, stability, and growth. Our industry has lived through several ugly downturns in the past, and we know that patience, persistence, insight, and innovation pay off. And we look forward to working with industry, legislators, and others to come together, take stock, and prepare for brighter days ahead. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee, and I would stand for questions if there's any questions.
Thank you, Ed. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Cross? Cindy, our representative neighbors?
Cindy's fine. Cindy's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard a report this morning on the radio, and I appreciate what the powers are that you talked about from the United States perspective. But in Kansas, the report said that wind was the highest producer of energy in 2020 in Kansas. Coal was second. In fact, wind had 38, I think, coal 30, a little over 31, and then the last was gas. So I don't know whether it's because we have more wind and we are a high wind state, but those numbers seem to be a little bit reversed in Kansas. I think because of where wind energy is and the wind farms that we have today. So it's turned around a little bit from the world or U.S. perspective.
And, you know, when I quote those from the U.S., I'm talking about total energy use. So that's also including transportation. And so when you look at like, you're probably talking about power sector energy, you know, what's producing electricity, you know, which is wind. And whenever you look at also of all energy use, including transportation fuels, that's whenever the oil and gas becomes a major part of the total energy mix. And so yeah, if you're looking at just the power sector, yeah, in Kansas, yes, I think wind is the largest one. You know, but if you looked at all energy mixes, which is what the Energy Information Administration looks at when they look at that from the United States, then the transportation fuels makes it so that the oil and gas consumption is much higher than what you might be thinking about there.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative, any others? Representative Delbordang?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you being here. And I'm looking for, I want to ask you a question, but I'm going to preface it by saying it is not a political, it's not meant to be biased or anything. I'm just looking for an honest answer. But you talked about the effects of COVID, so forth, but what are the effects of the Biden administration's recent executive orders on our drillers, producers, frackers, et cetera, in Kansas?
So you're talking about like the Keystone?
Just anything.
Okay.
I'd like to know, because you hear so many conflicting stories, you don't know what's real, what's wrong, and I'd like to hear it from an industry.
Well, yes, you know, and I'm not going to make a political discussion out of it, but I can just tell you that like the Keystone XL, for example, is, you said, does that affect Kansas producers? Well, overall, you know, it's going to decimate jobs in western states and Gulf Coast area. And you know, what we knew if you look at it from a national standpoint, it just means that we're going to use more oil from other places like Russia or Saudi Arabia, or places that have far less environmental standards. So it would make more sense to get our oil from Canada than Russia or Saudi Arabia. But it also means that a lot of the oil from Canada then will be either trucked or trained, which would be vastly higher emissions to get that out than a pipeline. So what does it do for Kansas? You know, it may increase oil prices because there's less oil here, and that, you know, you say, well, that, you know, Kansas producers would like that, but the overall change, we don't say we're opposed to Keystone and then say, you know, take that away, but don't hurt us in any way. We want to make sure that we have an environmentally responsible production, because we do need oil and gas for decades, and you know, our nation's not ready to just be off fossil fuels yet. So some of those executive orders like that. Trump did the same thing. He had a lot of executive orders, and that's one thing about executive orders. There's a change in administration. The other one can just change those immediately. So that's why it makes everybody just flip flop. All of a sudden, you're doing this, and all of a sudden you can't do it, and you're doing something else. But those executive orders do affect, and going forward, they'll affect the oil and gas industry in many ways. And we just need to look at an energy policy that's based on science and entrepreneurability and things like that. So we'll be communicating with Democrats and Republicans on the effects that they have on the small businesses. Usually when I go to Washington or I have Zoom calls with policymakers, that's what they're asking me about, is what is the impact to the small businesses that make up the oil and gas industry, not publicly traded companies. Our guys are small companies that raise their capital to the wellhead. I say, what the money they get from that well that they drill is that's the cash flow they use to drill another well or to make another, bringing more production on. They don't tap equity markets or try to get money from Wall Street for all of that. So it has a big impact on the oil and gas industry, and it will have on the small producers in Kansas as well.
I wasn't going to bring it up, but you mentioned the Keystone Pipeline. Mm-hmm. My knowledge on the Keystone is that was to bring crude and so forth in from Canada, but it wasn't going to stop in the U.S. It was taking it down to the Gulf of Mexico. So whether that goes in or not, yeah, I understand the rail cars, how the Warren Buffetts of the world fit into the rail and BNSF and all that, but does that really affect America's oil if it's being shipped down to the Gulf and out?
Whenever they first started the first Keystone Pipeline, one of the things we were concerned about is whenever they bring that pipeline down, they dump the heavy crude oil. It's a heavy crude oil, and they sell it into the markets that we sell our oil, like some of the refineries here in Kansas, for example. And so if those refineries are full, they have less room to buy Kansas production. And so in order to do that, they would only want to. Kansas production is a lighter, sweeter crude. It's more valuable than a heavier crude. But if the purchasers are full of the heavier crude, then they would only want to give Kansas producers the same price they were giving for the heavier crude. So that affects the economics of a lot of leases. So that's the kind of things that we worked out. So at that time, what they did is they built the pipeline from Cushing down to the Gulf Coast first, and then they built the other one. So that allowed more takeaway capacity, and that's what we want to do. Is make sure that we get it to the markets where they need it, not stop in between and flood local markets.
No other questions? President Carl.
My intro. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my question, I was a little surprised, I guess, that 30% or about a third of your production cost is electric rates. Could you give me some insight into what are the main uses of electricity in your?
Yeah, so sometimes it's higher than 30%, but you may have a well that they run on electricity. The pumping unit goes up and down, and we may have injection plants that dispose of water or use an enhanced oil recovery that uses electric motors to generate the pump to push it down, and it's a very high rate. And and in Kansas, we're not considered industrial load by a lot of the electric co-ops. It's considered retail as everything else. So we don't have any type of price breaks on that. So that becomes a very expensive proposition for the operators. And we've worked with electric co-ops. That's mainly who we work with, is electric co-op, not necessarily the big public utilities, but we tried to offer some win-win scenarios for them on some of those electric rates. So we continue to work on that. We haven't been successful in getting them to see those yet, but we'll continue to work.
Thank you, Representative Turner, right? Still trying to get everybody's names down. Any other questions? Ed provided you with a packet with all this information on it, so if you see that. Okay, Representative O'Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My question is in regards to production here in Kansas. How are we oil production? How are we doing compared to our neighboring states with respect to the effect of what we're seeing with Russia and, Saudi Arabia? How are we doing compared to our neighboring states in terms of oil production?
Yes, well, and I'll point you to a couple things. First of all, you're talking about our neighboring states like Oklahoma. Those are and Texas are much higher producing states than us. But whenever you look at the business environment, in one of my documents there, where Kansas is ranked as the third best oil and gas and business environment of the 20 states or something that they did a survey of, and that's just based on the fact that we have a good regulatory system and a good business system here, for operators to work in. And so, I always tell even the federal lawmakers that I think Kansas is a great example of how industry, the public, and the regulatory and legislators all work together to make good regulatory and energy policy. Now, Kansas is, I think we're ranked 11th as far as the number of states that where we produce oil. There's 10 other states that produce more oil than us, and many of our neighbors do. Oklahoma and Texas certainly do produce more. But Kansas is in the 11th place, and I think we're 14th on natural gas production. So we're in the middle of the pack on the oil and natural gas production, but I think we have a good system here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Okay, again, Tom has provided everyone with a packet of all the information in it, so that's what this blue thing is. Thank you, Ed. Look forward to seeing you again sometime. Next up was presentation on hearing. We're going to open the hearing on HB 2145. And then presenting on that will be Tom Pallas. Oh, yeah, okay. Good point. I'm not here. I don't see him, so they're out of mind. Nick, are you on here? Could you give us an update on this bill?
Yes, I am here, Mr. Chairman. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
Very great.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So committee, as the chair said, House Bill 2145. What this bill would do is it would amend KSA 66104, which is a statute that concerns the definition of public utilities and sets out the jurisdiction of the Kansas Corporation Commission and how that regulation of those public utilities occurs. So what this bill would do is it would exempt from public utility regulation any activity of an otherwise jurisdictional entity as to marketing or sale of electricity that is purchased through a retail electric supplier within that certified territory of that retail electric supplier for the sole purpose of the provision of electric vehicle charging services. Under this bill, kind of in summary, these vehicle charging services would not be regulated as a public utility. And that's all I've got, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Anybody have any questions for Nick? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. Hey, Nick, appreciate you being there. There's a couple of lines on the bill, and I realize just the italicized, I guess, is a change where we're making the changes for the electric vehicles and retail. But what took place January 1st of '01 where it changed some things? It talked about, that at the option of otherwise jurisdictional entity, the term public utility shall not include, and it talks any new construction and that is placed in service on or after January 1st of '01. And I'm questioning all of the wind, the solar, et cetera, over the past 20 years. Why does it not include that?
That's a very good question. And what I would need to do to give you a good answer on that is I need to go back into the session laws and kind of see when that change came into the statute and see what the testimony is on that change and what the reasoning behind that is. I don't have an answer for you right away on that. And maybe one of the conferees might be aware, the KCC might be aware, but I'd have to do some further research on it.
Okay, appreciate it.
Any other questions? Seeing none? We'll move on to our in-person of Stanley Rasmussen, U.S. Army Regional Environmental Energy Office of Fort Leavenworth. Stanley, welcome to committee. You could introduce yourself.
Do that. Good morning, representatives. My name is Stanley Rasmussen. I am the Department of Defense Environmental Coordinator for the state of Kansas. And I'm also the Director of the U.S. Army's Regional Environmental and Energy Office for the state of Kansas. I office out of Fort Leavenworth. You might be wondering, why is somebody from the Department of Defense and Army here to testify on this bill? And honestly, a month ago, I probably wouldn't have been here. But about a week ago, a little over a week ago, I was on a call at headquarters with the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment, and with the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Energy and Sustainability. And we were discussing various energy legislation around the United States. And they said, hey, are you seeing any electric vehicle charging legislation in your states? And I have a 9-state territory I cover. And I said, well, yeah, I think I've seen a few bills in previous years and stuff. And they said, well, the Army's fleet vehicles are moving towards electric vehicles. And we would like you to support legislation that you see at the state level in your states that's going to help increase the number of electric vehicle charging stations and make it more accessible. And that's the way I see this bill, is that it's going to make it more accessible. We might see electric vehicle charging stations at truck stops and gas stations and quick shops and whatnot. And the word I got from headquarters is the Army is very supportive of this. So that's why I'm here. I've submitted my support in writing. You should have a copy of a letter from my office. And then I just wanted to be here in person to reemphasize that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Representative Delverdang, why would I guess that?
Thank you. It's the first time I've ever asked a question in here. Appreciate you being here. That's kind of a new twist on me there. I kind of question if the Army was heading that way. But, and this is probably long-term, and I hope to God I never realize it, but having been somebody that used to work in the bunkers, I'm well aware of and so forth of studies on the electronic impulses from a thermonuclear. What would happen with Army's electric vehicles in that situation?
Why, I don't know.
It's
I mean, if you read, looks like
thought
1 second after, it's a scary thought, but I don't know. You're talking about fleet vehicles. We're not talking about tactical vehicles.
That's what I was looking for.
So just vans, things like that move people around, but not the tactical vehicles.
Good answer. Thank you.
Representative Berkowitz.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In those discussions, was there any layout of framework of time to transfer to electric vehicles for those fleets?
Well, it's ongoing. They're every year adding more electric vehicles to their fleet, so it's an ongoing process. I don't know that I could tell you. I'd have to do a fair amount of research, and I don't even know if I could get a final answer on like how soon is Fort Riley going to have all of their fleet vehicles as electric or hybrid, but it is happening slowly throughout our installations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? None from the back? Okay, seeing none. Thank you for coming, and
Thank you.
appreciate you taking the time to come in.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, we'll move to a virtual presentation by Justin Wilson with ChargePoint. Justin, are you online here?
I am. Is my video and audio coming in okay, Mr. Chair?
There you go. We got you now. Thank you. The floor is yours, and introduce yourself for the committee, please.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm Justin Wilson, and I'm a Director of Public Policy at ChargePoint. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'll be brief because I want to speak about a narrow but an important update to the Kansas statutes that we've heard about just a little bit already today. Quickly about ChargePoint, we're the largest electric vehicle charging network in the U.S. So we provide the hardware, the charging stations themselves, as well as a lot of the software that enables those charging stations to be used with electric vehicles. We have more than 127,000 independently owned charging spots on our network. And so those are located at traditional fueling stations, at libraries, at municipal buildings, really nearly any place that any commercial space that has electric service has the opportunity to host an electric vehicle charging station. ChargePoint's network has more than 750 stations already in Kansas. Those include the public
Looks like we lost you there for a few minutes.
Kansas. It links the east and the west coast of the United States via Interstate 70, as well as the northern and southern borders via the Interstate 35 system.
Hold on just
So
a
it's
second.
just
Mr. Wilson, we could see your lips move, but we couldn't hear you here in the conference room about probably a minute and a half ago. So sorry about that.
If it pleases the chair, I may go off of video briefly for bandwidth issues and do a short read of the highlights of the testimony and come back on for video. Is that okay?
That'd be fine.
Thank you. So I'll pick back up. Just from ChargePoint's perspective, we see Kansas at the crossroads of the U.S. You are linking east and west coast via Interstate 70, as well as the northern and southern borders via the Interstate 35 system. By clarifying that the term public utility does not apply to electric vehicle charging stations, as more and more Kansans choose to drive electric, we're going to be able to place charging stations at businesses, traditional fueling stations, workplaces, retail stores. And this clarification will foster competition and innovation in those spaces. To date, 35 states in the District of Columbia have looked at this issue and come to the same conclusion that electric vehicle charging stations are providing a service, not providing electric service, or not providing power, therefore should not be considered a public utility. So this is a critical step in setting up a robust and competitive marketplace for electric vehicle charging services. The next steps in this process will take some time, we just heard. As fleets begin to electrify, we're hoping that more and more charging stations will be made available so that when those fleets are off base, they can charge conveniently and easily. And just a quick note, this is not the first time that Kansas has modified the definition of public utility. Just above the sections that we're modifying in this bill, you can see that in previous sessions, the legislature has exempted fueling equipment used for compressed natural gas vehicles. And so what we're seeking to do today is have that same exemption for electric vehicle charging stations. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any members have questions for Justin? Seeing none, thank you, Justin, for your virtual presentation. Moving on, we have Mark Augustine with Triplet. I think it's going to provide written testimony. Or Mark, are you on here?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Welcome to committee. Identify yourself and introduce yourself to the committee for the record.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman and committee members. I'm Mark Augustine. I'm president and owner of 24/7 Travel Stores in Kansas. Today, we consistently hear large companies are going green, converting their fleets to vehicles to electricity. Our government wants us to embrace electric vehicles. However, Americans are still hesitating because of the lack of convenient infrastructure across the nation to refuel, recharge their vehicle while on the move. I have friends and family asking me, when will electric vehicles be prominent in America? My answer is simple: when our government officials update the regulations to allow the resale of electricity. Unless you're in the weeds researching what it takes to bring electric vehicle recharging to market, one does not know that resale electricity is not allowed by statute unless you're a public utility. Your support of House Bill 2145 is the first step in making the case for private businesses reselling energy to the traveling public to consider offering the service at our convenient refueling locations. Consumers need the transparency of knowing how to compare prices from one recharging location to the next. Just like today, they can easily compare the price of a gallon of gasoline in the marketplace, reselling electricity by the kilowatt hour, and pricing it as a retail product is needed in the marketplace. I have funding lined up with the Department of Energy to energize the interstate corridors in Kansas, but I need the regulatory side of this energy source to catch up to offer this service. I ask your support for House Bill 2145. I appreciate the opportunity to give testimony today and would be happy to try to answer any questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry, we were having a conference on about something here.
It's okay.
I missed something. Oh, ready for questions? I'm sorry. Any questions for Mr. Mark? Seeing none? Mark, thank you for testifying virtually.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes. Next up on virtual is Jeff McClellan. McClellan, is that correct? For KCC, are you online?
Yes, sir, I am. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair Seibert and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. My name is Jeff McClanahan. I'm the Director of the Utilities Division for the Kansas Corporation Commission, and we are a proponent of this bill. Back in 2016, we addressed then Kansas City Power and Light's first application to rate base some EV charging stations in Kansas City area and in Missouri. We declined to rate base those EV charging stations for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons was that we believed that a competitive market was the best approach. We were a little hesitant to allow the rate basing when the utility could exercise its monopoly power, put EV charging stations sort of everywhere and limit the ability of other competitors to come into that market should it change. So attached to my testimony is a cite from the testimony that we provided back then. This testimony was provided by Dr. Robert Glass, who's our Chief of Economics and Rates, so you can read that. So while HB 2145 does not provide or establish a competitive market per se, it does in effect allow for that. But it will still allow a utility to request to place in rates EV charging stations. And it'll be our intent to carefully monitor that and ensure that the utilities do not harm or perform anti-competitive measures by putting in too many. So it'll be a delicate balancing act for us to evaluate it, but I know Evergy wants to put in or is thinking about putting in charging stations in underserved areas, and that may make a great deal of sense. So we think we can provide that protection with the current language in the bill, and we're supportive of it. And with that, I would stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Anybody have any questions for Jeff? Seeing none? Those are the proponents for the bill, 2145. Okay, I'm missing a number here, sorry. Are there any opponents virtually? Are there any opponents virtually for this? Seeing none, we'll move to the written testimony. Written testimony, we have 4 proponents. Emily Wolf with Metropolitan Energy Center. Is she listening by any chance? I know, just Tom Pallas was a proponent for it with written testimony. Doug Shepard with Kansas Electric Co-op. Doug, he's usually here. Is he here by chance? Seeing none. Laura Lutz with Evergy, written testimony. Dave Nickel with Citizens Ratepayer Utility Board. Dave? Dave back there, would you like to say anything real quick? No, thank you. Okay, thanks for your written testimony. Jim Frank for Everbuild. Is he online or is it? Okay. Okay, we have a fiscal note that's attached to your on this. It'll be in your packet. Those are the written proponents. Are there any written opponents? Are there any written opponents? Seeing none. Any neutral opponents? Any neutral opponents? Seeing none. Are there any amendments? I know, this was asking, do we have any amendments? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. Not an amendment or anything. I was just waiting if I could throw out a general question for, maybe it's to you, maybe it's to staff. Thinking back a couple of years, I'm thinking I've heard this kind of over and over, but has this bill or one, I'm going to say substantially similar, been run past this committee or ever passed this committee, but never gotten anywhere? And it was specific to charging stations for retail. Because I know the subjects come up. What were the previous bills, or did they actually make it through?
Nick, would you have any answers for that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Nick Myers with the Revisor's Office. Representative Delperdang, yes, there have been prior bills focused on EV charging stations. I'd have to look. I don't believe any of those bills passed out of committee, but I'd have to go back and double check on that. But I know there's been one in 2017 and maybe one last biennium as well. So I could look and see.
Okay, and that's the dates I'm thinking. I would appreciate it if, I just don't know if they actually made it out of the committee or not.
Certainly.
So you guys are going to get together on it on your own? Okay, Nick, if you can, or whatever works. Representative Schreiber? Are you fine? Okay. Any other discussion? Anybody have any questions for anybody that was here? Any questions for anybody? Any comments from the committee on this? Appreciate y'all being here and doing this. So we will close the hearing on, I think I got it right, HB 2145. Okay. Is there any announcements in the committee? Seeing no announcements, I would like to invite you down to my office for coffee and tremendously delicious cinnamon rolls from Jessica Lucas. If they're not all gone by now, but stop down within 10 minutes from time we leave here so we can get back down there. So there's a great bunch of nice cinnamon rolls. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Representative Delperdang's question, there was a similar bill last year that passed out. I want to say it's 2585. Don't quote me on the number, but it passed out and then was amended on the floor. I believe that's how the progress of it.
So it actually made it to the floor and was amended? Yeah. I assume at that point it probably went to the Senate and then we were all kicked out, so to speak. And
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Now, there was a
that's
number
right.
of bills we passed out that we were cut short. So anyway, that's why I think a lot of these are coming up again to try to be reintroduced on that. So any other questions? Well, committee, thank you for being very patient. I know, thank our techie guy from IT down here. your work's, let's give him a hand because their work's cut out for him. And seeing no other business for the Energy Telecom Committee, we are adjourned until Thursday. We will probably try to work this bill Thursday. So if you can be here so we can get it work first thing. Okay? Thank you. We are adjourned.